I was having coffee last week with an old friend, a senior structural engineer who spent 30 years ensuring high-rises don't collapse in an earthquake. He's the kind of guy who used to obsess over the tensile strength of a single rivet, a man of absolute mathematical precision.
Right.
But this time he wasn't talking about steel or concrete. He was talking about fear. Not fear of a building falling down, but fear of his own hiring committee. He described a recent meeting to fill a critical safety role. They had two candidates. One had a portfolio full of complex, solved engineering problems. The other had a resume heavy on lived experience and the right political keywords, but struggled to explain basic load distribution.
Oh, wow.
And here's the kicker. The room fell silent. Everyone knew who the competent engineer was, but the manager looked around, visibly nervous, and whispered, "We have to consider the optics of this hire." They went with the second candidate. My friend just stared at his cup and said, "We are planting time bombs in the cement." That nervous silence in the boardroom is the exact same silence you hear right before a door plug blows off a commercial airliner at 16,000 feet. We tend to view these recent headlines, the crumbling infrastructure, the plagiarism scandals, the sudden failures of critical systems, as isolated runs of bad luck. But they aren't. They are the calculated result of a system that has decided to prioritize ideology over function. We aren't just seeing accidents, we are watching the deliberate exile of competence, and physics is finally starting to take its revenge.
That opening story, which is, it's deeply unsettling, perfectly frames what we're trying to do in this deep dive.
It really gets to the heart of it.
It does. When you hear about an engineer being more afraid of his HR department than of the structural integrity of his own work, you just know we've crossed a critical line.
A point of no return, almost.
It feels that way. And we're going to investigate the claims that this systemic decline in safety and function isn't just anecdotal. It's not just a feeling people have. It is measurable, and it's the direct result of institutional choices.
So our goal today is really to map that pressure, that nervous silence your friend talked about, onto real-world measurable outcomes. We're trying to understand the mechanism. How does performance get pushed aside for a political narrative?
That is the core mission. And we've structured this deep dive around three main pillars. First, we're going to examine that measurable decline in engineering and safety standards across critical sectors.
Aviation, infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we'll look for a correlation with the institutional prioritization of these ideological metrics over traditional, meritocratic competence.
Okay.
Second, we'll analyze the massive economic and functional decay caused by administrative bloat. How are resources that are meant for the core mission getting, cannibalized? Finally, we explore the inevitable collision, you could say, often violent conflict between objective physical reality physics, economics, and modern ideological narratives, like the pursuit of equity of outcome.
Let's start with that diagnosis then. When we look at the source material, this idea that systems are failing isn't new, but the way they're failing seems to have changed. It's not about a single broken part anymore.
No.
Your friend, the engineer, prioritizing optics over engineering, that really sets the scene. The sources we've looked at highlight that these failures, whether they're in medicine, infrastructure, aviation, they're now glaring, recurrent failures.
And that recurrence is the key diagnostic feature. It's the signal.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if it was just an isolated tech issue, we'd look at, material science, metallurgy, software bugs.
The usual suspects.
The usual suspects. But when we see simultaneous failure patterns across fundamentally different high-stakes fields, from surgery to bridge design to air travel, that signals a deep shared infection.
An infection within the systems themselves.
Within the systems that staff and govern those fields, exactly. The conclusion you have to draw is that this points to a profound failure in the underlying selection mechanisms.
Meaning, the rules for choosing who gets to perform these highly specialized, critical jobs, those rules have been broken. Or corrupted.
Precisely. If the criteria you're using to select a candidate for, say, a heart surgery residency, or to lead a complex infrastructure project, if those criteria are compromised by non-performance metrics, then failure isn't a risk anymore.
It's a certainty.
It's a certainty baked right into the process. So the failure isn't technological, it's managerial. It's governance-based. The institutional watchman, the professional whose entire job is to ensure the safety of the public, finds the very principles they rely on, objectivity, precision, competence, actively compromised by the institutions they serve. It's a complete reversal of professional values.
And the professional consequence of that reversal is this deliberate downgrading of standards.
Yes, and it's a deliberate action. It's taken in the name of some supreme organizational directive, often under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We're talking about domains that demand absolute objective rigor.
Right. A bridge either stands or it doesn't.
You either understand fluid dynamics or you don't. Your built is torqued correctly or it isn't. When you introduce non-performance metrics like race, gender, perceived victim status as criteria for selection in these domains, you are actively undermining the system's ability to perform.
The sources use a really powerful technical term for this, artificial dimensionality reduction. Can you bring that down for us? What does that mean in this context?
Absolutely. Think of competence as a complex signal. A job like designing an airplane wing requires competence across, maybe 10 distinct, measurable, and highly dimensional metrics.
Things like material science, stress testing, computational modeling.
Safety compliance, and so on. That's a 10-dimensional problem. Artificial dimensionality reduction is what happens when the institutional filters decide to collapse those 10 critical dimensions down to just one or two non-performance social metrics.
Like demographic representation.
Exactly. And then they select candidates based primarily on that reduced social dimension.
So you're ignoring the 9 dimensions that ensure the plane actually stays in the air and focusing only on the one dimension that ensures the hire looks right on the company's diversity report.
That is precisely the mechanism. Competence is the signal the system needs to process to produce a safe output. When you inject these non-performance metrics, you are, in technical terms, injecting noise into a signal processing system.
And that noise just messes everything up.
It contaminates the selection process. It guarantees a degraded, less reliable, and ultimately dangerous output.
This shift from objective standards to, social noise, it's perfectly illustrated in that story of Marcus, the quality assurance veteran at a major American aerospace manufacturer. His job was the very definition of objective rigor.
For Marcus and people like him, the world was binary, safety compliant or safety critical. For 30 years, his entire job relied on the cold, impartial laws of physics. His value was in his ability to be ruthless in ensuring that the bolt was torqued to spec, that the seal was perfect.
If it wasn't, the plane didn't fly. End of story.
That was the bedrock, the unshakable foundation of the entire industry.
But then he saw the warning signs. A recurring, purely technical issue. An alignment problem with a door plug installation. A critical piece of the fuselage. He flagged it, just as he had flagged thousands of issues before.
But what changed was the institutional response.
Right.
The response was not technical. It was entirely managerial and ideological. His new supervisor, who came from organizational dynamics, a field completely divorced from the physics of flight, didn't ask about the technical specs.
What did she ask?
Instead, she asked Marcus if he was singling out the team responsible for the installation, because that team had been explicitly formed to meet new departmental demographic targets.
Wow. So the technical problem suddenly became a cultural problem, a political one.
The implication was crystal clear. By pointing out this uncorrected failure, Marcus wasn't doing his job as a quality control expert anymore. He was engaging in cultural aggression. He was faced with a profound institutional dilemma.
He could file the report and be seen as a troublemaker.
Or worse. If he filed the technical report, the penalty would likely be professional isolation, maybe censure, or even being fired. And it wouldn't be framed as incompetence on their part, but as his lack of cultural sensitivity, his opposition to the company's core values.
So in that single moment, Marcus faced a complete inversion of professional responsibility. He had to choose between his duty to physics and the safety of thousands of passengers, or his own job security within an institution that had decided that feelings now outrank physics.
He chose silence. He watched the technical error move down the line uncorrected. And that anecdote, it highlights that the real damage isn't just the eventual failure of the plane door blowing out. It's the internal capitulation of the competent professional.
The system is now designed to punish the honest watchman.
That's it.
This process of compromising the functional core of an institution is labeled the deliberate dismantling of meritocracy. That sounds active. It doesn't sound like an accident.
It absolutely is active. When the primary criteria for success shift away from performance, you set the stage for what's called the tyranny of mediocrity. Once an institution prioritizes compliance with social metrics over quantifiable achievement, excellence itself becomes a structural threat.
Why a threat? You'd think excellence is what everyone wants.
Because excellence is objective. It sets a standard. And that standard inevitably exposes the inadequacy of the bureaucratic layer that promoted the non-merit candidate in the first place.
So the mediocre bureaucracy, in a move of self-preservation, has to purge the excellent.
Precisely. The truly competent individual, the one who can demonstrate that the emperor has no clothes, disrupts the comfortable narrative of the administrative class. They have to be exiled or silenced. The institution, now captured by ideological imperatives, systematically selects for compliance and mediocrity.
And you see this everywhere.
Everywhere. From the corporate world, where capital gets diverted through ESG scoring away from R&D, the engine of competence, toward compliance and political theater, to the public sector, where utility is ignored in favor of narrative. The entire system is now engineered to reward the correct belief, not the correct result.
It's a really deep shift. The focus moves from what we achieve to what we say we're doing. And this kind of systemic capture, it must require incredible resources to maintain, which I think brings us to our next point. The financial cost of this ideological shift.
Yes, the price tag is enormous.
The shift we're discussing from function to compliance is incredibly expensive. So now we're moving into the realm of financial cost, or what the sources we've looked at call administrative parasitism. And the prime measurable example of this decay is the modern higher education system.
The academic world, it really offers the cleanest data set to understand this institutional capture by non-productive administrative layers. The growth rate of this class isn't just linear, it's exponential. The statistics are, frankly, shocking.
Let's look at those numbers again. From 1987 to 2012, American colleges and universities hired over 517,000 administrators and professional employees.
500,000. And to put that number into perspective, that increase in non-teaching, non-research personnel over a 25-year period, it averages out to 87 new administrative hires every single working day across the United States.
87 a day, that's unbelievable.
It's roughly the population of a major city like Atlanta, all just absorbed into these bureaucratic roles within the university system.
And this expansion has led to some truly, grotesque administrative to student ratios, even at our most prestigious institutions.
Yale is a very stark illustration. For fewer than 5,000 undergraduate students, Yale employs an astonishing army of over 5,460 administrators and managers.
So they literally have more people managing the institution than receiving instruction at the undergraduate level.
They do. This isn't governance anymore. This is a self-perpetuating ecosystem where the primary function is to maintain and expand the administrative apparatus itself.
And this explosion, it signals a fundamental shift in the university's identity. You mentioned that before the 1970s, the structure was very different. How did that old model protect the core mission?
In the pre-70s model, administrative tasks, like being a department chair or a dean, were often temporary assignments. They were cycled through by senior faculty members.
So there were still teachers, still researchers.
Exactly. And because those professors still had to return to the classroom and the lab, the core educational mission was inherently difficult to ignore. Administrative tasks were clearly a means to an academic end. The people in power were first and foremost scholars.
But today, we have a professional management class that sees management as an end in itself.
Precisely. They are professional managers. Many lack any faculty experience, coming straight from business or organizational management programs. They're profoundly disconnected from the classroom, yet they wield immense financial and institutional power.
And the cost of maintaining this layer is staggering.
It is. Administrative expenses now account for nearly a quarter of all spending at American universities. We saw that between 1993 and 2007, spending on administration per student increased by a massive 61%, dramatically outpacing inflation.
When institutions are pouring money into bureaucratic overhead at that rate, the cost has to be passed on somewhere. And the most immediate victim is the student.
The data shows a direct correlation. This administrative bloat is the primary driver of tuition inflation. Just look at the increase over the last 2 decades. Private U.S. college tuition is up 144%, and in-state public school tuition has soared by 212%.
And studies consistently show that increases in per-student spending on administration are the leading indicator for tuition hikes in the following academic year. When a university hires a new high-paid dean of student experience, that salary is being paid for by tuition that is making the university objectively less accessible to the average family.
And the money has to be diverted from somewhere else. Where is the core instructional mission suffering the most? It's a zero-sum budget game. Since 1980, the percentage of total university spending dedicated to instruction has decreased dramatically, from 41% all the way down to just 29%.
That's a huge drop.
It is. Meanwhile, administrative positions grew 10 times faster than tenured faculty positions between 1993 and 2009. The resource allocation clearly favors bureaucracy over teaching and research.
And that burden falls hardest on the people actually doing the teaching.
The people on the front lines, the faculty, are suffering the financial trade-off. Universities are freezing tenure-track positions and relying more and more on lower-paid, overworked part-time adjunct faculty. Today, roughly half of all post-secondary faculty are part-time.
And the reality for them is pretty grim.
It is. One report found that over a quarter of adjunct faculty rely on public assistance. 40% struggle to cover basic living costs, with many making under the federal poverty line of $25,000 a year.
When you force your teaching staff to work multiple jobs just to survive, the quality of instruction has to decline.
It necessarily declines. The core mission is being cannibalized to fund the growing bureaucratic apparatus.
This administrative expansion creates a kind of vacuum of accountability. If the growth is this fast and the cost is this high, what exactly are all these people doing? I mean, one law professor is quoted as saying, literally nobody knows who all these people are or what they're doing.
The roles are often incredibly ambiguous. They seem designed more to facilitate internal processes and compliance than to contribute to external knowledge or student development. You see these titles like Health Promotion Specialist or Student Success Manager, which often translate into endless meetings, report generation, and process creation.
The perfect illustration of this kind of institutional self-referential work is the Harvard example we uncovered, the Task Force on Visual Culture and Signage.
That task force is a textbook case of mission drift. It was comprised of 24 members, including 9 administrators. After 15 meetings and hundreds of focus groups, all consuming immense administrative time, it produced a 26-page report on campus signage.
On signs.
On signs, and the ultimate tangible outcome of this monumental effort.
Let me guess, another committee.
The creation of a new full-time administrative post, the FAS campus curator, and yet another new committee to oversee the curator. This work provided absolutely zero educational or research benefit. It existed solely to perpetuate and justify the existence of the administrative layer.
This systemic self-justification is exactly what C. Northcote Parkinson observed decades ago.
Yes, the primary focus of his 1955 essay was the mechanism behind what we now call Parkinson's law. Specifically, its second meaning, that the number of workers in a bureaucracy tends to expand regardless of the amount of work to be done. It's an internal growth mechanism.
And he identified 2 core drivers for this seemingly illogical expansion, right?
We did. The first principle is just simple human nature within a hierarchy. An official wants to multiply subordinates, not rivals. By surrounding themselves with 2 or 3 subordinates, an official elevates their own status, increasing the apparent complexity and necessity of their role. They ensure their own survival.
They don't hire rivals who might displace them. They hire functionaries who reinforce their command structure.
Exactly. And the second principle is that officials make work for each other.
And that's the genius of the bureaucratic immune system.
It is. The subordinates, having been hired, must now justify their existence. So they generate internal memos, committees, status updates, reports that require input and response from other officials and departments. This artificially inflates the perceived volume of required work.
And Parkinson's historical example was the British Colonial Office.
That's right. The staff there increased by 100% even as the British Empire contracted and the number of colonies declined. The work had become entirely self-referential and internal, and this dynamic perfectly describes the modern university, where the work of the administrator is often entirely focused on processing the output of other administrators.
And this isn't just theoretical decay. It has a direct, detrimental impact on the core functions of the university, as the empty lab anecdote shows so powerfully. We see the administrative class actively cannibalizing their research mission.
This involves a woman named Dr. Eris, a respected biochemist at a prestigious UK university. Her work was focused on antibiotic-resistant bacteria, a globally recognized life-or-death public health concern. She needed funding for critical, cutting-edge equipment.
So she goes into the budget meeting expecting a rigorous scientific discussion on the merits of her grant proposal. But the committee It's dominated by non-scientists, vice deans of student life, directors of equitable outreach, strategy coordinators.
People focused on governance and narrative compliance, not scientific discovery.
And
The result was devastating. A denial of her critical equipment funding. The reason was entirely bureaucratic. The discretionary funds that would have financed her research were diverted to expand the administrative staff for the university's Office of Belonging, which had just hired its 15th assistant director.
it's the clearest example of the institutional mission being sacrificed. The core function, life-saving scientific discovery, is literally starved to feed the parasitic administrative class. The university is no longer optimizing for knowledge or public health.
It's optimizing for bureaucratic employment and ideological compliance. And the consequence is that the resources needed to fight a ticking public health time bomb are diverted to fund an office whose primary function is internal, procedural, and focused on social metrics. When resources are finite, every administrative hire is a functional sacrifice somewhere else in the system.
Okay, we've established the massive economic cost and the institutional capture within academia. Now we have to transition to the corporate and governmental worlds where this prioritization of metrics over function, the core theme of this dive, collides most violently with the public interest: safety.
This is the essential bridge. The same bureaucratic pressure that creates a dean of signage at Harvard also creates internal pressure on a company designing an aircraft. We need to investigate how the institutional prioritization of diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI metrics affects hard outcomes like workplace safety and corporate performance.
The argument here, as it's presented in the material, is that while the underlying goals of DEI representation inclusion are admirable, the implementation can lead to severe unintended consequences, especially in technical, safety-critical environments.
That's the key distinction. In fields demanding specialized technical skills, rigorous adherence to safety protocols, and zero tolerance for error, prioritizing demographic factors under intense corporate pressure can lead companies to overlook essential hyper-specific qualifications.
So if the pressure is external from activists, investors, or regulators to meet specific demographic targets, but the candidate pool for highly technical or physically demanding roles is limited among certain underrepresented groups, what happens to the firm?
The firm is forced to make a dangerous trade-off. They may select from a narrower pool of qualified applicants, placing greater emphasis on diversity metrics over established, objective job readiness simply to satisfy that external directive.
And that misalignment.
That misalignment, particularly in roles demanding specific technical training, specialized certifications, or intense physical rigor, is what research has correlated with adverse safety outcomes. The company is optimizing for the optics of the hire rather than the competence required to perform the job safely.
And this isn't just about anecdotal fear. We need to look at the empirical data that connects the prioritization of these metrics to measurable corporate and safety performance issues.
The data strongly suggests unintended counterproductive effects. If we look at high-level corporate governance first, studies examining mandatory gender quotas for corporate directors found that while they met the quota targets, they often reduced firm value in companies that already had strong governance structures.
So shifting the primary selection criteria from pure merit to a quota seems to introduce systemic friction, a degradation of quality.
That's what the data suggests. The case of Norway is particularly stark in this regard.
What happened there?
In 2003, Norway mandated that 40% of corporate directors must be women. The analysis of this policy change showed a significant drop in the stock prices of the affected Norwegian companies almost immediately after the law's introduction. Furthermore, the mandatory introduction of these quotas appeared to negatively impact the experience and qualifications of the newly appointed female directors, suggesting the pool was stretched beyond its highly qualified capacity.
Resulting in diminished overall board competence.
Exactly. Now, let's drill down to tangible physical safety in the workplace. What did the specific safety data show when measured against diversity metrics?
This is where it gets very real.
Researchers introduced a variable they called a diversity score and correlated it directly with hard safety data. They found a statistically negative and significant correlation with workplace accidents.
What does that mean exactly?
Specifically, a higher diversity score, meaning greater emphasis or compliance with diversity metrics, correlated negatively with both the total accidents recorded and the total number of employee lost working days. This isn't a judgment on diversity itself, but on the prioritization of diversity metrics over essential technical qualifications in safety-critical environments. The evidence suggests that when selection rigor is compromised, the measurable risk increases.
Beyond the empirical safety data, there's the impact on the human element, the organizational climate. We saw Marcus remain silent out of fear. How does this systemic pressure to meet quotas affect general job satisfaction and create broader internal conflict?
The mandate creates a perception of unfairness. If employees see that opportunities, promotions, or job placements are based on hitting demographic targets rather than demonstrable qualification, job satisfaction plummets. This loss of meritocratic trust leads directly to disengagement.
And we know disengagement is not just a morale issue, it's a safety issue.
Exactly. Disengaged employees, feeling that their work effort is not the primary determinant of their success, are demonstrably less focused on rigorous compliance and safety protocols. And what's more, the pressure forces a silent but significant exodus of competence from the top.
How so?
Executives who built their careers on merit-based hiring and performance may feel deeply frustrated by the pressure to compromise those standards to meet external quotas. They often choose to leave rather than participate in what they view as the functional decay of their institutions.
It's an interesting cycle. The pursuit of an ideological metric leads to internal conflict, diminished morale, the exodus of top talent, and empirically verifiable declines in safety performance.
And if we shift the focus now to governance, specifically Congress, we see the same decay of objective competence, but through a different mechanism, entrenched power, rather than quota-based selection. We can contrast the modern political reality with the ideal of the citizen statesman.
Right. The Founding Fathers envisioned government service as a temporary national commitment, a pause in a productive real-world career. You had figures like Dr. Ben Carson, the pioneering neurosurgeon, who brought tangible external competence into the political arena.
That is the crucial distinction. A citizen statesman has an objective, quantifiable measure of their competence outside of politics. They are successful engineers, lawyers, doctors, business leaders. Today, that model is increasingly rare. It's been replaced by the incumbent career politician.
And the irony is that this political class cites wisdom and experience as the benefits of long tenure, yet congressional approval stood at a dismal 19% as of July 2023. The public clearly doesn't feel well served by this accumulated experience.
And the system is designed to entrench this lack of accountability. Re-election rates for incumbents consistently hover between 95% and 100%. The average tenure of a representative has nearly quadrupled since the early days of Congress. This institutional inertia creates a permanent political class, disconnected from the economic and functional realities of the people they represent.
And that detachment is measurable, both financially and physically.
Financially, the gap is immense. 52% of Congress are millionaires, compared to only 5% of the American public. This economic detachment makes it nearly impossible for them to grasp the daily realities of their constituents.
You see examples like Representative Maxine Waters.
Right, who owns a $6 million mansion in a district different from the one she represents.
Yeah.
A district where 1 in 5 people live below the poverty line. The physical environment and economic incentives driving their decisions are fundamentally different from the people they serve.
And then there is the inescapable issue of age and physical competence. The median age in the Senate is 65.3. In the House, it's 57.9. That's significantly higher than the national median of 38.1.
And this advanced age factor, when coupled with the tendency to cling to power, raises genuine non-political concerns regarding the potential loss of faculties.
Yeah.
While experience is valuable, when key decision makers who control the world's most powerful military and economy show visible signs of cognitive decline, the risk to national security and consistent crisis management becomes substantial.
So the system is prioritizing the maintenance of entrenched political careers over the peak functional competence required to govern a complex modern state.
That's what it looks like.
We've tracked this decay from the compromised boardroom to the bloated university budget and the entrenched political establishment. All these paths, they converge on a single unavoidable point: the collision between ideology and objective reality. This is what you call the revenge of physics.
Physics always bats last. This principle is governed by the second law of thermodynamics. Complex, technical, and social systems naturally tend toward disorder or entropy. To maintain order, safety, and capability, a civilization requires constant, focused energy and ruthless objective filtering.
And that filtering is competence. It's meritocracy.
It is. If you stop maintaining the system, it will inevitably degrade.
And the fatal arrogance is the belief that this natural law, this tendency toward entropy, can somehow be wished away or superseded by social narratives or language games.
The ideology of equity of outcome is the clearest modern expression of this arrogance. It proposes that Hard constraints, whether physical, mathematical, or biological, can be socially engineered out of existence. But objective reality is completely indifferent to human intent.
Right.
Material fatigue doesn't care about a company's mission statement. A degraded transformer doesn't respect a city council's desire for fairness, and a failure in load-bearing calculations will result in a collapse, regardless of the demographic makeup of the team that approved the plan.
Let's look at the lights went out anecdote. This perfectly illustrates that moment when ideology just smacks into immutable reality.
Engineer Sarah, a senior grid operator in a major Western state, had spent 5 years submitting clear warnings to her city council. Her data showed that 40-year-old transformers and substations were degrading rapidly and could not handle the increased electrical load of a modern heat wave. Her recommendations for critical hardware upgrades were consistently ignored.
And where were those essential capital funds being diverted?
They were diverted to fund extensive energy equity programs and public relations campaigns focused on the city's green transition. The political priority was focused on ensuring the grid was fair damage, distributing perceived benefits equally, before ensuring the grid was robust. The narrative compliance consumed the budget intended for physical competence.
And then the heat wave hit, just as Sarah predicted.
Exactly. A critical transformer blew due to material failure entropy taking its course. The system failed exactly where competence had been starved. And the profound irony is that the resulting power outage, the failure of the physical system, disproportionately affected the most vulnerable communities, the very people the equity programs were theoretically designed to uplift.
Which proved that the laws of thermodynamics didn't care about the city's mission statement.
Not one bit.
This brings us to a crucial analysis of the ideology itself. This concept of equity of outcome, defined by political leaders as everyone ending up at the same place, is just fundamentally at odds with observed reality and individual freedom.
That definition, when enforced institutionally, attempts to render individual achievement and competition redundant, which is why it has been academically critiqued as a form of Marxism. The premise is that if everyone starts with equal opportunity, which is an admirable goal, they must therefore achieve equal results. This ignores the vast constellation of factors that determine success far beyond opportunity.
You're talking about things like talent, effort, persistence, even just plain luck.
Yes. Success is multivariate. You can provide two individuals with the exact same starting point, same education, same resources, but their inherent attributes, like natural talent, differences in IQ, varying levels of conscientiousness, even genetic predispositions, mean they will inevitably achieve vastly different outcomes.
And trying to force identical outcomes ignores these measurable differences in human interest and capability.
Absolutely. For example, studies on professional interests consistently show men tend to prefer working with things like engineering or physics, and women tend to prefer working with people, like nursing, HR, or teaching.
And that difference in preference explains the clustering we see in certain people-centric professions, like 88% of registered nurses being women, or 85% of primary school teachers. Trying to force equal outcomes across all fields, regardless of those fundamental interests, requires enormous systemic distortion and inefficiency.
It requires ignoring reality. We need to detail the three fundamental critiques that make enforced equality of outcome unsustainable in a functional society.
Okay, let's start with the claim that hierarchies are just artificial human constructs.
Critique 1. Equality of outcome is unnatural. Dominance hierarchies are not a uniquely human invention. They are a feature common to virtually all social species: mammals, birds, fish, insects. They exist as mechanisms to reduce constant costly conflict.
Like the game of chicken or the hawk-dove game in game theory.
Exactly. Constantly fighting for status or resources is biologically and economically expensive. Hierarchies, or pecking orders, emerge to establish stability, defining who has access to which resources, and thereby reducing conflict and maintaining order. The pursuit of equality of outcome ignores this fundamental stable order that's inherent in nature.
The second major critique focuses on incentives. If the outcome is guaranteed, the motivation collapses.
Critique 2. Severe disincentive to hard work. If society guarantees that regardless of your effort, you will end up in the same place as the person who puts in twice the work, the entire incentive structure for high performance collapses. Why engage in painful, difficult, or risky innovation if the reward is redistributed to those who chose to put in minimal effort?
We saw this mechanism play out clearly in Australia.
During recent government handouts, where the common professional sentiment was, I made just as much with the grant, except I don't have to work. A society that actively rewards slacking over competence and effort cannot be progressive or capable.
And finally, the economic cost of wealth redistribution, the primary tool for achieving outcome equity on long-term growth.
Critique 3. Inhibiting innovation. High taxation, which is the practical means of achieving wealth redistribution, diminishes the return on investment for risk takers and innovators. If the reward for developing a complex new technology or launching a company is significantly taxed away, the incentive to invest the necessary time, capital, and intellectual rigor vanishes.
And research has shown this empirically.
It has. One study correlated a 1% increase in the median or top tax rate with a 4% decline in patents, citations, and registered inventors. Outcome-based equity sacrifices long-term innovation and growth for short-term, politically palatable distribution.
The fundamental trade-off is unavoidable then. You're trading freedom for control.
That's the dichotomy articulated in the source material. Free people make free choices. Free choices mean you get unequal outcomes. You can have freedom or you can have equal outcomes. You can't have both. Enforced equality requires a central authority that suppresses individual choice and objective standards, leading directly to the systemic incompetence we've been documenting.
To ground this entire debate, we can move away from modern Western institutions and look at a historical case study that serves as a powerful natural experiment. Japan at the end of the 19th century, specifically focusing on how they structured their elite educational system.
This is compelling because it allows us to track cohorts before and after a decisive shift in selection criteria. The context is Japan's drive to rapidly modernize. They were transitioning their higher education system by centralizing admissions for the national higher schools, the exclusive entry point to the most prestigious tertiary education.
The pre-centralization system relied on regional admissions, right? It gave local schools monopoly power over who got to go to college. So what was the goal of centralization, and how did it change how students applied?
The goal was to establish a truly meritocratic national system to produce the best possible future elites for the modernized Japanese state. When centralization, a single objective national examination, was introduced, the strategic response from applicants was immediate and measurable. Applicants applied much more aggressively to the most selective school, which was School 1 in Tokyo.
So meritocracy created a highly competitive national market almost overnight.
Precisely. This transition caused a sharp increase in what's called enrollment distance. Students were suddenly willing to travel much farther regionally to attend the best school. This immediate effect broke the local monopoly power of regional schools.
And critically, because competition for School 1 was so intense, a large number of high-scoring, high-achieving applicants were rejected by that top institution.
That's right. And they were subsequently assigned to their second or lower choice schools, specifically schools 2 through 8.
This created two distinct groups, a small group of the absolute highest achievers at School 1 and a much larger dispersed cohort of nearly as high achievers concentrated in schools 2 through 8.
This new meritocratic assignment system fundamentally changed the geography of elite education. We need to ask, did centralization benefit all regions equally?
When researchers analyzed the change in the number of successful entrants, what distribution pattern emerged?
The distributional effects were highly unequal. The centralized system disproportionately benefited urban centers. Tokyo and its surrounding urban areas saw a significant gain in school seats,
while the more rural prefectures lost seats.
Correct. Most western and northern, more rural prefectures saw a loss of seats.
That makes intuitive sense. The centralized, high-stakes testing favored students from urban centers who had access to richer educational infrastructures and more rigorous preparatory schools.
Exactly. The increased regional mobility allowed urban-born high achievers, who often came from higher socioeconomic statuses, to effectively crowd out rural applicants who previously benefited from the decentralized, less competitive regional quotas. So meritocracy is a net positive for national competence, but it is not inherently an equalizing force geographically or socioeconomically. It tends to identify and reward talent where it is most rigorously cultivated.
So the crucial test of this experiment is the long-run outcome. Did the new meritocratic system actually produce better elites for the Japanese state over the following decades?
That's the key question. Researchers tracked these centralized and decentralized cohorts over decades using historical data, focusing on individuals who achieved the highest ranks in society. Top income earners, corporate executives, prestigious medal recipients, and especially high-ranking bureaucrats promoted to the top 3 ranks of the higher civil service, the imperial appointees.
And what was the key finding when comparing the two systems?
The centralized meritocratic assignment system produced a significantly greater number of top-ranking officials compared to the decentralized cohorts. Now, while the absolute number of people passing the higher civil service exams remained steady, that was dictated by ministry demand, the quality of the candidates changed, and the positive effect was overwhelmingly concentrated on graduates from schools 2 through 8.
The places where those urban high achievers who were rejected by School 1 ended up being concentrated.
Yes, the number of top-ranking officials who graduated from schools 2 through 8 increased by a massive 47% for the centralized cohorts compared to the decentralized ones. School 1, the absolute top institution, saw only a small and statistically insignificant effect.
And this tells us something profound about the power of meritocratic assignment.
It does.
So, the rigorous objective system, by routing the highest caliber students into the appropriate elite educational pipelines, regardless of whether they got into their absolute top choice, created a measurable, long-lasting net positive effect on the national production of competence and leadership. Meritocracy works because it ruthlessly optimizes for functional capability.
That's what the data says.
This deep dive, tracing the systemic failures from the silent boardroom through administrative bloat into the conflict between ideology and physics, it really highlights one unbending truth. A functional civilization requires objective standards.
The common thread across aviation, infrastructure, university finance, societal governance, it's the divergence from objective measurement. The evidence points to a systemic capture by bureaucratic layers that prioritize narrative compliance and ideological metrics over functional necessity and quantifiable competence.
And the result is always the same. Higher costs, massive economic decay, lower quality of public service, and a rise in tangible, measurable risk to the public. We saw the university cannibalize research funding, the corporation compromise safety protocols, and the city council risk a power grid collapse. All in the name of political optics.
And physics and objective reality are immutable. The laws of entropy ensure that systems lacking constant focused maintenance and selection based on capability will fail. Competence remains the non-fungible resource upon which all advanced society depends. When the costs of incompetence become unbearable and failures accumulate, the market for problem solvers will violently reassert itself. It will demand objective standards once again.
So the essential duty is clarity.
It's clarity. To refuse complicity with the lies that enable this decay and to cultivate and protect competence wherever it is found.